Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. I'm going to continue to do another chapter tonight on Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony C. Sutton, who was a researcher at Stanford and has written many books, especially about the Bolshevik Revolution. Also, he's done a book on Franklin Roosevelt, and he's also done a book on Hitler. And then he's done other books also. He's probably written close to 8 or 10 books, deeper subjects, so to speak. He's done a lot of research himself. So let's get into chapter 6 with the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And it's called Consolidation and the Export of the Revolution. Marx's great book, Das Kapital, is at once a monument of reasoning and storehouse of facts. Lord Milner, member of the British War Cabinet in 1917 and director of the London Joint Stock Bank, that is, William Boyce Thompson is an unknown name in 20th century history. Just a second. It's kind of a bug. I guess a gnat. Anyway, got history. Yet Thompson played a crucial role in the Bolshevik Revolution. Indeed, if Thompson had not been in Russia in 1917, subsequently history might have followed a quite different course. Without the financial and more importantly, the diplomatic and propaganda assistance given to Trotsky and Lenin by Thompson, Robbins, and the New York Association, the Bolsheviks may well have withered away and Russia evolved into a socialist but constitutional society. Who was William Boyce Thompson? Thompson was a promoter of mining stock, one of the best in high-risk business before World War I. He handled stock market operations for the Guggenheim copper interests when the Guggenheims needed quick capital for a stock market struggle with John D. Rockefeller. It was Thompson who promoted Yukon Consolidated Gold Fields for an unsuspecting public to raise a 3.5 million war chest. Thompson was manager of the Kennecott Syndicate, which is also involved in copper. Another Guggenheim operation valued at $200 million. It was Guggenheim Exploration, on the other hand, that took up Thompson's options on the rich Nevada Consolidated Copper Company. And about 3/4 of the original Guggenheim Exploration Company was in control by the Guggenheim family, the Whitney family, who owns Metropolitan Magazine, which employed the Bolshevik John Reed and John Rhine. In 1916, the Guggenheim interests reorganized into Guggenheim Brothers and bought in William C. Potter, who was formerly with the Guggenheim American Smelting and Refining Company, but who was in 1916 first vice president of Guarantee Trust. By the way, Guggenheim, not Guggenheim, I want to say, um, the Yukon Goldfields, which we're involved in, but the Kennecott was another company, which actually has once had a huge copper mine in Alaska. They built a railroad just for this particular purpose in the early 1900s, and it took a lot of money to do that. Maybe I'll sometime read that story. I think there's a book on that whole issue. It's a very interesting book. The bridge was built for this particular it's called the Cooper River. I think it was called, yeah, Cooper River. And I'm trying to name the railroad too. It's Cooper River or something. But anyway, they built a bridge somewhere, I think, a bridge maker, and they put it on a ship, and they shipped it all the way around. I don't know how they got it to Alaska. I don't know if they went through the Panama Canal or if they went around the South American coast all the way around back up to um, Alaska, but it was a big deal. Anyway, and the Whitney family are definitely rich people too. There's no doubt about that. They're some of the first people who came here to America. Extraordinary skill in raising capital for risky mining promotions named Thompson a personal fortune and directorship in Inspiration Consolidated Copper Company, Nevada Consolidated Company, Copper Company, and Utah Copper Company, all major domestic copper producers. And that's another thing I meant to share. There is also a railroad is called Utah Railways, and it was one of its major. It was a railroad, but it was also carried a lot of copper, and I assume it was from the copper companies that are in that area. All domestic copper producers. Copper is, of course, a major material in manufacturing of munitions. Thompson was also director of Chicago Rock Island Pacific Railroad, the Magma Arizona Railroad, and the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. And a particular interest for this book, Thompson was one of the heaviest stockholders in the Chase National Bank. It was Albert H. Wiggin, president of Chase Bank, who pushed Thompson for a post in the Federal Reserve Service system. And in 1914, Thomas became the first full-time director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the most important bank of all the 12 banks in the Federal Reserve System. By 1917, then William Boyce Thompson was a financial operator of the substantial means, demonstrating ability with a flair for promotion and implementation of capitalistic projects, and with ready assets to the centers of political and financial power. This was the same man who first supported Alexander Kerensky, and who then became an ardent supporter of the Bolsheviks, bequeathing a surviving symbol of the support, a laudatory pamphlet in Russian, in Bolshevik, that is, about the Bolsheviks. Before leaving Russia in early December 1917, Thompson handed over the American Red Cross mission to his deputy, Raymond Robbins. Robbins then organizes Russian revolutionaries to implement the Thompson plan for spreading Bolshevik propaganda in Europe. Let's see, let me look and see. I want to show something here. Let me show this up here. Let's see, Appendix 3. Let's see if I can find it here. Maybe it's not here. Well, actually, there is one here. Let me show you the chart here. You can see it. And it's showing basically People's Commissionary for Foreign Affairs, Trotsky, the Press Bureau with Radek, R-A-D-E-K, Bureau of Investigative Revolutionary Propaganda, Reinstein, and then field operators were John Reed, Louise Bryant, Albert Rise William, Robert Miner, Phillips Price, and Jacobus Sodolo. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Let's continue on with this. A French government document confirms that it appeared that Colonel Robbins was able to send a subversive mission of Russian Bolsheviks to Germany to start a revolution there. The mission led to the aborted German Spartacus revolt of 1918. The overall plan also included schemes for dropping Bolshevik literature by airplane or for smuggling it across German lines. So what's happening here is that this is going to be an enormous project trying to create issues with Germany now. There's a war, a propaganda war with them, trying to overthrow their government with the communists. And with the government that replaces Hitler, not Hitler, but Bismarck, and then it becomes von Papen, who's just a stooge, and he's completely oblivious of what's going on, it seems like, and Germany is completely coming apart. And what Germany's looking for is a strong man. That's what they're looking for, because von Papen basically was allowing communists to rule everything and was just allowing the country to completely come apart. So anyway, back to that. Thompson made preparations in late 1917 to leave Petrograd and sell the Bolshevik Revolution to governments in Europe and to the United States. With this, in mind. Thompson Cable with Thomas W. Lamont, a partner in the Morgan firm, who was then in Paris with Colonel E.M. House. Colonel House never misses a point. Lamont recorded the receipt of the cablegram in his biography. Just as the House mission was completing a discussion in Paris in December 1917, I received an arresting cable from my old school and business friend, William Boyce Thompson, who was then in Petrograd in charge of the American Red Cross mission there. Lamont journeyed to London and met with Thompson, who had left Petrograd on December 5th, traveled to via Bergen, Norway, and arrived in London on December 10th. The most important achievement of Thompson and Lamont in London was to convince the British War Cabinet, then decidedly anti-Bolshevik, that the Bolshevik regime had come to stay and that British policy should cease to be anti-Bolshevik, should accept the new realities, and should support Lenin and Trotsky. Wow. Thompson and Lamont left London on December 18 and arrived in New York on December 25, 1917. They attempted the same process of conversion in the United States. The consolidation with Lloyd George. The secret British War Cabinet papers are now available and record the argument used by Thompson to sell the British government on a pro-Bolshevik policy. The Prime Minister of Great Britain was David Lloyd George. Lloyd George's private political machinations rival those of Tammany Hall politicians, yet in his lifetime and for decades after, biographers were unable or unwilling to come to grips with them. In 1970, Donald McCormick, The Mask of Merlin, lifted the veil of secrecy. McCormick shows that by 1917, David Lloyd George had bogged too deeply in the mesh of international armaments intrigues to be a free agent and was beholden to Sir Basil Zaragoff, an international armaments dealer, whose considerable fortune was made by selling arms to both sides in several wars. That's the same thing the bankers do. Zaragoff wielded enormous behind-the-scenes power and, according to McCormick, was consulted on war policies by the Allied leaders. Holy crap. On more than one occasion, reports McCormick, Woodrow Wilson, Lord George, and Georges Kaminsky met in Zaragoff's Paris home. McCormick notes that Allied statesmen and leaders were obliged to consult him before planning any great attack. Oh my God. British intelligence, according to McCormick, discovered documents which incriminate servants of the Crown as secret agents of Sir Basil Zaragoff. With the knowledge of Lloyd George, that is, in 1917, Zaragoff was linked to the Bolsheviks. He sought to divert munitions away from anti-Bolsheviks and already intervened in behalf of the Bolshevik regime in both London and Paris. In late 1917, then at the time Lamont and Thompson arrived in London, Prime Minister Lloyd George was indebted to powerful international armaments interests that were allied to the Bolsheviks and providing assistance to extend Bolshevik power in Russia. The British Prime Minister who met with William Thompson in 1917 was not then a free agent. Lord Milner was the power behind the scenes, and as the epigraph to this chapter suggests, favorably inclined towards socialism and Karl Marx. The secret War Cabinet papers give the Prime Minister account of a conversation with Mr. Thompson, an American returning from Russia, and the report made by the Prime Minister to the War Cabinet. After meeting with Thompson, the Cabinet papers reads as follows. The Prime Minister reported a conversation he had had with Mr. Thompson, an American traveler and a man of considerable means who had just returned from Russia and who had given a somewhat different impression of affairs in that country from what generally were believed. The gist of his remarks was to the effect that the revolution had come to stay, that the Allies had not shown themselves sufficiently sympathetic with the revolution, and that M.M. Trotsky and Lenin were not in Germans' pay, the latter being a fairly distinguished professor. Mr. Thompson had added that he considered the Allies should conduct in Russia active propaganda carried out by some form of Allied council composed of men especially selected, or the purpose further that on the whole he considered having regard to the character of the de facto Russian government, the several Allied governments were not suitably represented in Petrograd. In Mr. Thompson's opinion, it was necessary for the Allies to realize that the Russian army and people were out of the war, and that the Allies would have to choose between Russia as the friendly or a hostile neutral. The question was discussed as to whether the Allies ought not to change their policy in regard to the de facto Russian government, the Bolsheviks being stated by Mr. Thompson to be anti-German. In this connection, Lord Robert Cecil drew attention to the conditions of the armistice between the Germans and the Russian armies, which provided inter alia for trading between the two countries, allied, I should say, for the two countries and for the establishment of purchasing commission in Odessa. The whole arrangement being obviously dictated by the Germans, Lord Robert Cecil expressed the view that the Germans would endeavor to continue the armistice until the Russian army had melted away. Sir Edward Carson read a communication signed by Mr. Trotsky, which had been sent to him by a British subject, the manager of the Russian branch of the Bauhaus, BAUX Hall Motor Company, who had just returned from Russia. The report indicated that Mr. Trotsky's policy was ostensibly, at any rate, one of hostility to the organization of civilized society rather than pro-German. On the other hand, it was suggested that an assumed attitude of this kind was by no means inconsistent with Trotsky's being a German agent, whose object was to ruin Russia in order that Germany might do what she desired in that country. After hearing Lord George's report and supporting arguments, the War Cabinet decided to go along with Thompson and the Bolsheviks. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. It's unbelievable. What a sell. Milner had a former British consul in Russia called Bruce Lockhart, ready and waiting in the wings. Lockhart was briefed and sent to Russia with instructions to work informally with the Soviets. The thoroughness of Thompson's work in London and the pressure he was able to bring to bear on the situation are suggested by subsequent reports coming into the hands of the War Cabinet. From authentic sources, the reports provided a quite different view of Trotsky and the Bolsheviks from that presented by Thompson, and yet they were ignored by the cabinet. In April 1918, General John Smuts reported to the War Cabinet his talks with General Neufeld, the head of the French military mission, who had just returned from Russia. General John Smuts was also involved in the Boer War, which was in South Africa. And actually, the British were the first to use concentration camps. It wasn't the Germans, it wasn't the Russians. What are you talking about, Brad? When the British wanted to, under Cecil Rhodes, discovered that basically Southern Africa, not only South Africa, but areas north of that, what we would call Rhodesia, which was a country that was named after Cecil Rhodes, what took place was they knew there was tons of gold there, there was tons of minerals there, and they were not going to let these Afrikaners, they call them, which are Dutch people who settled in South Africa for over 100 years before the British was even there, and were farmers, and they basically got their butts kicked. The British got their butts kicked until they used what we call concentration camps with women and children. That's right, you heard that. That's not talked about. Winston Churchill was involved in that also, folks. You see, so when you always, and we don't know the really history a lot of times, we are told that Russia was a Soviet Union, I should say, was belligerent with their concentration camps, what they call them. I'll get that in a minute. And then also the Germans used it. But those two countries were not the first ones to use it at all. It was the British. The British were involved in South Africa. Let's continue. Trotsky was a consummated scoundrel who may not be pro-German, but is thoroughly pro-Trotsky, that is, and pro-revolutionary, and cannot in any way be trusted. His influence is shown by the way he had come to dominate Lockhart, Robbins, and the French representative. He, the council's great prudence in dealing with Trotsky, who he admits is the only really able man in Russia. Several months later, Thompson D. Thatcher, Wall Street lawyer and another member of the American Red Cross mission to Russia, was in London. On April 13, 1918, Thatcher wrote to the American ambassador in London to the effect that he had received a request from H.P. Davison and Morgan Partner to confer with Lord Northcliffe concerning the situation in Russia and then to go on to Paris for other conferences. Lord Northcliffe was ill, and Thatcher left with yet another Morgan partner, Dwight W. Morrow, Morrow, a memorandum to be submitted to Northcliffe on his return to London. That is, this memorandum not only made explicit suggestions about Russian policy that supported Thompson's position, but even stated that the fullest assistance should be given to the Soviet government in the effect to organize a volunteer revolutionary army. The four main proposals to this Thatcher report are: first of all, the Allies should discourage Japanese intervention in Siberia. Remember, the Japanese had already attacked earlier, in the early 1900s, and actually beat the tar out of the Soviets in the eastern part of Russia. In the second place, the fullest assistance should be given to the Soviet government in its effort to organize a volunteer revolutionary army. Thirdly, the Allied governments should give their moral support to the Russian people in their efforts to work out their own political systems free from the domination of any foreign power. And fourth, until the time when open conflict shall result between the German government and the Soviet government of Russia, there will be opportunity for peaceful commercial penetration by the German agencies in Russia. So long as there is no open break, it will probably be impossible to entirely prevent such commerce. Steps should therefore be taken to impede, so far as possible, the transport of grain and raw materials to Germany from Russia. So this is the ploy here is to get Russia's minerals and important valuable things that they have there. Thompson's intentions and objectives. Why would a prominent Wall Street financier and director of the Federal Reserve Bank want to organize and assist Bolshevik revolutionaries? Why would not one but several Morgan partners working in concert want to encourage the formation of a Soviet volunteer revolutionary army, an army supposedly dedicated to the overthrow of Wall Street, including Thompson, Thomas Lamont, Dwight Morrow, the Morgan firm, and all their associates? Thompson at least was straightforward about the objectives in Russia. He wanted to keep Russia at war with Germany, yet he argued before the British War Cabinet that Russia was out of the war anyway, and to retain Russia as a market for post-war American enterprise. It's all about money, trade. The December 1917 Thompson memorandum to Lord George describes these aims. The memorandum begins: the Russian situation is lost, and Russia lies entirely open to unopposed German exploitation. So they're moving on here. Okay, so you see what they're doing here. They already say there's no chance that Russia they're going to overthrow the communists. They're already making that agreement, even though they have not been in power for more than a year or less, 2 years, and yet they're worried about the Germans. You see, so this is about greed. And concludes, I believe that intelligence and courageous work will still prevent Germany from occupying the field to itself, and thus exploiting Russia at the expense of the Allies. Consequently, it was German commercial and industrial exploitation of Russia that Thompson feared. This is also reflected in the Thatcher memorandum, and that brought Thompson and his New York friends into an alliance with the Bolsheviks. Moreover, this interpretation is reflected in a quasi-judicial statement made by Raymond Robbins, Thompson's deputy, to Bruce Lockhart, the British agent. You will hear it said that I am the representative of Wall Street. I am the servant of William B. Thompson to get Altaria copper from him, that I have already got 500,000 acres of the best timberland in Russia for myself, that I have already copped off the Trans-Siberian Railway, that they have given me a monopoly of the platinum of Russia, that this explains my working for the Soviet. See, what's going on here, folks, is the leaders of the Soviet Union now, the communists, are not really, they're concerned about money, yes. They want to do their revolution. That's what they want to do. They're not really occupied or concerned about materials, platinum, oil, whatever, timber. They don't care. That's not what they want. They're not even concerned about that, which tells you something. Their objective was something more sinister, far more, and they knew this. These corporate people knew this also. They were communists. They wanted to experiment with their revolution, and they did. You will hear that talk. Now I do not think it is true. Commissioner, but let us assume it is true. Let us assume that I am here to capture Russia for the Wall Street and American businessmen. Let us assume that you are a British wolf and I am an American wolf, and that when this war is over, we are going to eat each other up for the Russian market. Let us do so in perfectly frank man fashion. But let us assume at the same time that we are fairly intelligent wolves, and that we know that if we do not hunt together in this hour, the German wolf will eat us both up, and then let us go to work. With this in mind, let us take a look at the Thompson personal motivation. Thompson was a financier, a promoter, and although without previous interest in Russia, had personally financed the Red Cross mission to Russia and used the mission as a vehicle for political manipulation. From this total picture, we can deduce that Thompson's motives were primarily financial and commercial. Of course it was. Specifically, Thompson was interested in the Russian market and how this market could be influenced, diverted, and captured for post-war exploration by Wall Street syndicate or syndicates. Certainly, Thompson viewed Germany as an enemy, but less a political enemy than an economic or commercial enemy. Germany industry and German bankers were the real enemies. To outwit Germany, Thompson was willing to place seed money on any political power vehicle that would achieve his objective, in other words. Thompson was an American imperialist fighting against a German imperialist, and this struggle was shrewdly recognized and exploited by Lenin and Trotsky. The evidence supported this political approach. In early August of 1917. William Boyce Thompson lunched at the U.S. Petrograph Embassy with Kerensky, Tereshchenkov, and the American ambassador Francis. Over lunch, Thompson showed his Russian guest a cable he had just sent to the New York office of J.P. Morgan requesting transfer of 425,000 rubles to cover a personal subscription to the new Russian Liberty Loan. Thompson also asked Morgan to inform my friends, I recommend these bonds as the best war investment I know. We'll be glad to look after their purchasing here without compensation. He then offers personally to take up 20% of New York syndicate buying 5 million rubles of the Russian loan. Not unexpectedly, Kerensky and Tereshchenkov indicated great gratification and support from Wall Street. And Ambassador Francis by cable promptly informed the State Department that the Red Cross Commission was working harmoniously with me and that it would have an excellent effect. Other writers have recounted how Thompson attempted to convince the Russian peasants to support Kerensky by investing $1 million of his own money and U.S. government funds on the same order of magnitude in propaganda activities. So is he saying investing $1 million of his own money and U.S. government funds? So they were using government funds also to do this, which is a travesty. Subsequently, the Committee on Civil Education in Free Russia, which is an oxymoron, headed by the revolutionary grandmother, Breshkovskaya, with David Sashkin, Kerensky's private secretary. As executive, established newspapers, news bureaus, printing presses, and speakers bureaus to promote the appeal. Fight the Kaiser and save the revolution. It is noteworthy that the Thompson-funded Kerensky campaign had the same appeal: keep Russia in the war, as had his financial support of the Bolsheviks. The common link between Thompson's support of Kerensky and his support of Trotsky and Lenin was continue the war against Germany and keep Germany out of Russia. And brief behind and below the military, diplomatic, and political aspects of World War I, there was another battle raging, namely a maneuvering for post-war world economic power by international operations with significant muscle and influence. Thompson was not a Bolshevik. He was not even a pro-Bolshevik. Neither was he pro-Kerensky, nor was he even pro-American. The overriding motivation was the capturing of the post-war Russia market. This was a commercial, not an ideology. Objective ideology could sway revolutionary operations like Kerensky, Trotsky, Lenin, etc., but not financiers. The Lord George Memorandum demonstrates Thompson's partially for neither Kerensky nor the Bolsheviks. After the overthrow of the last Kerensky government, we materially aided the dissemination of the Bolshevik literature, distributing it through agents and by aeroplanes to the German army. This was written in mid-December 1917, only 5 weeks after the start of the Bolshevik Revolution, and less than 4 months after Thompson expressed his support of Kerensky over lunch in the American embassy. This is mind-boggling. This is just unbelievable. Let's continue. Thompson returns to the United States after being in Britain. Thompson then returns and tours the United States with a public plea for recognition of the Soviets. In his speech to the Rocky Mountain Club of New York in January of 1918, Thompson called for assistance for the emerging Bolshevik government and appealing to an audience composed largely of Westerners, evoked the spirit of the American pioneers. These men would not have hesitated very long about extending recognition and giving the fullest help and sympathy to the worker man's government of Russia. Because in 1819 and the years following, we had out there Bolshevik governments and mighty good governments too. It strains the imagination to compare the pioneer experience of our Western frontier to the ruthless extermination of political opposition then underway in Russia already. They were lying. They were fucking lying. To Thompson, promoting this was no doubt looked upon as akin to his promotion of mining stocks in days gone by. As for those in Thompson's audience, we know not what they thought. However, we know one raised a challenge, though. The speaker was a respected director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a self-made millionaire, and that counts for much. And after all, had he not just returned from Russia? But all was not rosy. Thompson's biographer, Herman Hagedorn, had written that Wall Street was stunned that his friends were shocked and said he had lost his head and turned Bolshevik himself. While Wall Street wondered whether he indeed turned Bolshevik, Thompson found sympathy among federal directors on the board of Federal Reserve Board Bank of New York. Co-director W.L. Saunders, chairman of Ingersoll Rand Corporation, and the director of the FRB, the Federal Reserve Bank, wrote President Wilson on October 17, 1918, so roughly almost a year after the Bolshevik Revolution, stating that he was in sympathy with the Soviet form of government. At the same time, he disclaimed any alternative motives, such as preparing now to get the trade of the world after the war. Most interesting of Thompson's federal director was George Foster Peabody, deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and a close friend of socialist Henry George. Peabody had made a fortune in railroad manipulation, as Thompson had made his fortune in the manipulation of copper stocks. Peabody then became active in behalf of government ownership of railroads. Holy shit. And openly adopted socialization. How did Peabody reconcile his private enterprise success with promotion of government ownership? According to his biographer, Lewis Ware, W-A-R-E, he recently told him that if it was important for this form of transport to be operated as a public service rather than for the advantage of private interests. This high-sounding do-good reasoning hardly rings true. It would be more accurate to argue that given the dominant political influence of Peabody and his fellow financiers in Washington, they could by government control of railroads more easily avoid the rigors of competition. Through political influence, they could manipulate the police power of the state to achieve what they had been unable, or what was too costly to achieve under private enterprise. In other words, the police power of the state was a means of maintaining a private monopoly. It was also basically, if I understand it here, this was exactly what Frederick C. Howe had proposed. The idea of a central planned socialist Russia must have appealed to Peabody. Think of it, one gigantic state monopoly. And Thompson, his friend and fellow director, had the inside track with the boys running the operation. The official ambassador, Robbins, Lockhart, and Segal. The Bolsheviks, for their part, correctly assessed a lack of sympathy among the Petrograd representatives of the three major Western powers, the United States, Britain, and France. The United States was represented by Ambassador Francis, undisguisedly out of sympathy with the revolution. Great Britain was represented by Sir James Buchanan, who had strong ties to the Tsarist monarchy and was suspected of having helped along the Kerensky phase of the revolution. France was represented by Ambassador Paleolog, openly anti-Bolshevik. In early 1918, three additional personages made their appearance. They became de facto representatives of these Western countries and edged out the official recognized representatives. Raymond Robbins took over the Red Cross mission from W.B. Thompson in early December 1917, but concerned himself more with the economy and political matters than attaining relief and assistance for the poverty-stricken Russians. Of course, that's the way they are, folks. On December 26, 1917, Robbins cabled Morgan's partner, Henry Davison, temporarily the Director General of the American Red Cross, please urge upon the President the necessity of our continual intercourse with the Bolshevik Revolution government. On January 23, 1918, Robbins cables Thompson, then in New York. Soviet government stronger today than ever before. Its authority and power greatly consolidated by dissolution of the Constituent Assembly. Cannot urge too strongly the importance of prompt recognition of Bolshevik authority. Siskin approves the text and requests you to show the cable to Creel, C-R-E-E-L. Thatcher and Warwell concur. So they're wanting the United States, they're wanting the British, they're wanting France, all these countries to recognize the Soviet Union because they've got a money deal here. They're wanting to get the support from the Americans and the British and the French. They need that, they think. Soviet governments, later in 1918, on his return to the United States, Robbins submits a report to Secretary of State Robert Lansing containing this opening paragraph: American economic cooperation with Russia. Russia will welcome American assistance in economic reconstruction. Robbins' persistent efforts on behalf of the Bolshevik cause gave him a certain prestige in the Bolshevik camp, and perhaps even some political influences. The U.S. Embassy in London claimed in November 1918 that Salakar owed his appointment as Bolshevik ambassador to Switzerland to American no other than Mr. Raymond Robbins. About this time, reports began filtering into Washington that Robbins was himself a Bolshevik. For example, the following from Copenhagen, dated December 3rd, 1918. Confidentially, according to a statement made by Riedel to George de Papori, late Austrian-Hungarian Consul General at Moscow, Colonel Robbins, formerly chief of the American Red Cross mission to Russia, is at present in Moscow negotiating with the Soviet government and acts as the intermediary between the Bolsheviks and their friends in the United States. The impression seems to be in some quarters that Colonel Robbins is himself a Bolshevik, while others maintain that he is not, but that his activities in Russia have been contrary to the interests of associate governments. Nothing like money, folks, to make you change your mind. Materials in the files of the Soviet Bureau in New York and seized by the Lusk Committee, L-U-S-K, Committee in 1919 confirmed that both Robbins and his wife were closely associated with Bolshevik activities in the United States and with the formation of the Soviet Bureau in New York. The British government established unofficial relations with the Bolshevik regime by sending to Russia a young Russian-speaking agent called Bruce Lockhart. Lockhart was in effect Robin's opposite number. But unlike Robin's, Lockhart had direct channels to his foreign office. Lockhart was not selected by the Foreign Secretary or the Foreign Office. Both were dismayed at his appointment. According to Richard Altman, Lockhart was selected for his mission by Milner and Lord George themselves. Maximilian Lenovo, acting as an unofficial Soviet representative in Great Britain, wrote for Lockhart a letter of introduction to Trotsky. In it, he called the British agent a thoroughly honest man who understands our position and sympathizes with us. We have already noted the pressure on Lord George to take a pro-Bolshevik position, especially those from William B. Thompson and those indirectly from Sir Basil Zarokov. Remember the guy who's the French guy who's the armament dealer, and Lord Milner. Milner was at the epigraph to this chapter suggested exceedingly pro-socialist. Edward Cranshaw has succinctly outlined Milner's duality. Some of the passages that is in Milner on industry and society are passages which any socialist would be proud to have written, but they were not written by a socialist. They were written by the man who made the Boer War. Some of the passages on imperialism and the white man's burden might have been written by a Tory diehard. They were written by the student of Karl Marx. According to Lockhart, the socialist bank director, Milner was a man who inspired in him the greatest affection and hero worship. Lockhart recounts how Milner personally sponsored his Russian appointment, pushed it to cabinet level, and after his appointment talked almost daily with Lockhart while opening the way for the recognition of the Bolsheviks. Milner also promoted the financial support for the opponents in South Russia and elsewhere, and did Morgan in New York. The dual policies consisted with the thesis that the modus operandi of the polarized internationalists, such as Milner and Thompson, was to place state money on any revolution or counter-revolution horse that looked a possible winner. The internationalists, of course, claim any subsequently benefits. The clue is perhaps in Bruce Lockhart's observation that Milner was a man who believed in the highly organized state. The French government appointed an even more openly Bolshevik sympathizer, Jacques Sadot, an old friend of Trotsky. Wow, so much for being even-handed here. In sum, the Allied government neutralized their own diplomatic representatives in Petrograd and replaced them with unofficial agents more or less sympathetic to the Bolsheviks. The reports of these unofficial ambassadors were in direct contrast to pleas for help addressed to the West from inside Russia. Maximum Gorky protested the portrayal of revolutionary ideas by the Lenin-Trotsky group, which had imposed the iron grip of a police state in Russia. We Russians make up a people that has never yet worked in freedom, that has never yet had a chance to develop all its powers and its talents. And when I think that the revolution gives us that possibility of free work, of a many-sided joy in creating, my heart is tilled with great hope and joy, even in these cursed days that are besmirched with blood and alcohol. There is where begins the line of my decided and irreconcilable separation from the insane actions of the people's commissarios. I consider Maximus an idea very useful for the boundless Russian soul. Its task is developed in the soul great and bold needs, call forth the soul necessary fighting spirit and activity to promote initiative in an indelible soul and to give it shape and life in general. But the practical Maximilius of the Ankar communists and visionaries from this Smolny is ruinous for Russia and above all for the Russian working class. The people's commissaires having Russia like material for an experiment. The Russian people is for them what the horse is for learned bacteriologists who indicate the horse with typhus so that the anti-typhus lymph may develop in its blood. Now the commissaires are trying such a predestined to failure experiment upon the Russian people without thinking that the tormented, health-starved horse may die. The reformers from the Smolny do not worry about Russia. They are not. They are cold-blooded, sacrificing Russia in the name of their dream of the worldwide and European revolution. And just as long as I can, I shall impress this upon the Russian proletariat. Thou art being led to destruction. Thou art being used as material for an inhuman experiment. Also, in contrast to the reports of sympathetic unofficial ambassadors were the reports from the old line diplomatic representatives, typical many messages flowing, that is, from Washington in early 1918, particularly after Woodrow Wilson's expression of support for the Bolshevik governments, was the following cable from the U.S. legation in Bern, Switzerland. For Pope, President message to Consul Moscow, not understood here, and people are asking why the president expressed support of Bolsheviks in view of rampant murder and anarchy of these bands. So there's already low-key people already saying, what the hell are you doing, Wilson? Continued support by the Wilson administration for the Bolshevik led to the resignation of DeWitt C. Poole, the capable American charge d'affaires in Archangel, that is in Russia. It is my duty to explain frankly to the department the perplexity into which I have been thrown by the statement of Russian policy adopted by the Peace Conference, as in January 22nd, on the motion of the president. The announcement very happily recognized the revolution and confirms again that entire absence of sympathy for any form of counter-revolution, which has always been a keynote of American policy in Russia. But it contains not one word of condemnation for other enemies of the revolution, that is, the Bolshevik government. Thus, in the early days of 1918, the betrayal of libertarian revolution had been noted by such acute observers as Maxim Gorky and DeWitt C. Poole. Poole recommendations shook the State Department, which requested the ultimate reticence regarding your desire to resign, and stated that it will be necessary to replace you in a natural and normal manner in order to prevent grave and perhaps disastrous effect upon the morale of American troops in Archangel District, which might lead to loss of American lives. So they're trying to make you feel guilty here. So not only did Allied governments neutralize their own government representatives, but the U.S. ignored pleas from within and without Russia to see support of the Bolsheviks. Influential support of the Soviets came heavily from the New York financial area, little effective support emanated from domestic U.S. revolutionaries. In particular, it came from American International Corporation, a Morgan-controlled firm. Exporting the Revolution, Jacob H. Rubin. We are now in a position to compare two cases, not by any means the only such cases, which American citizen Jacob Rubin and Robert Minor assisted in exporting the revolution to Europe and other parts of Russia. Jacob H. Rubin was a banker who, in his own words, helped to form the Soviet government of Odessa. Rubin was president, treasurer, and secretary of Rubin Brothers on 19 West 34th Street, New York City. In 1917, he was associated with the Union Bank of Milwaukee and the Provident Loan Society of New York. Trustees of the Provident Loan Society, including persons such as mentioned elsewhere as having connection with the Bolshevik Revolution, were Rockefeller, Mortimer Schiff, and Jacob Speyer, S-P-E-Y-E-R. By some process, only vaguely recounted in his book, I Live to Tell, Rubin was in Odessa in February of 1920 and became the subject of a message from Admiral Macaulay to the State Department, dated February 13, 1920. The message was to the effect that Jacob H. Rubin of Union Bank, Milwaukee, was in Odessa and desired to remain with the Bolsheviks. Rubin does not wish to leave, has offered his services to the Bolsheviks, and apparently sympathizes with them. Rubin later found his way back to the United States and gave testimony before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs in 1921. I have been with the American Red Cross people at Odessa. I was there when the Red Army took possession of Odessa. At that time, I was favorably inclined towards the Soviet government because I was a socialist and had been a member of that party for 20 years. I must admit that to a certain extent, I helped to form the Soviet government of Odessa. So Odessa is on the Black Sea. Okay. It's basically the only warm Navy port that actually Soviet Union had. But it was also controlled because it simply had to go through the Mediterranean Sea to get to the oceans. While adding that he had been arrested as a spy by Denkin's, D-E-N-I-K-I-N government of South Russia, we learn a little more about Rubin. We do, however, know a great deal more about Robert Minor, who was caught in the act and released by a mechanism reminiscent of Trotsky's release from the Halifax prisoner of war camp. Supporting the revolution by Robert Minor, Bolshevik propaganda work in Germany, financed and organized by William Boyce Thompson and Raymond Robbins, was implemented in the field by American citizens under the supervision of Trotsky's People Commissar for Foreign Affairs. One of Trotsky's earliest invitations to the Foreign Office had been to institute a press bureau under Karl Radak and a Bureau of International Revolutionaries Propaganda under Boris Reinstein, among whose assistants were John Reed and Albert Rise Williams, and the full blast of these powerhouses was turned against the German army. A German newspaper, the Fragto, called the Torch, was printed in editions of 500,000 a day and sent by special train to Central Army committees in Minsk, which is in Belarus, and Kiev, which is in Ukraine, and other cities, which in turn distributed them to other points along the front. Robert Minor was an operative in Reinstein's propaganda bureau. Minor's ancestors were prominent in early American history. General Sam Houston, first president of the Republic of Texas, was related to Minor's mother, Rutez Houston. Other relatives were Mildred Washington, aunt of George Washington, and General John Minor, campaign manager for Thomas Jefferson. Minor's father was a Virginia lawyer who migrated to Texas after hard years with few clients. He became a San Antonio judge. Robert Minor was a talented cartoonist and a socialist. He left Texas to come east. Some of his contributions appeared in Masses, a pro-Bolshevik journal. In 1918, Minor was a cartoonist on the staff of the Philadelphia Public Ledger. Minor left New York in March of 1918 to report to the Bolshevik Revolution. You got to ask yourself something here, folks. There are a lot of Americans that really are involved in this Bolshevik deal. They're actually sympathy for them, and and it's not just the upper people here. You're already seeing this here, as though now maybe it's painted by the newspapers as this is something they've overthrown the czar to eliminate this such and such, so they feel like, okay, this is good. But most people are unaware that these crazy people, these psychopaths, such as Lenin and Trotsky, are going to destroy people's lives immensely. And no one seems to care about that. Minor joined Weinstein's Bureau of International Revolutionary Propaganda, along with Philip Price, correspondent of the Daily Herald and Manchester Guardian, and Jacques Soudal, the unofficial French ambassador and friend of Trotsky. Excellent data on the activities of Price, Minor, and Sidonia have survived in the form of Scotland Yard, London, Secret Special Report Number 4, entitled The Case of Philip Price and Robert Minor, as well as in reports in the files of the State Department, Washington, D.C. According to the Scotland Yard report, Philip Price was in Moscow in mid-1917 for the Bolshevik Revolution and admitted, "I am up to my neck in the revolutionary movement." Between the revolution and about the fall of 1918, Price worked with Robert Minor and the Commissar for Foreign Affairs. So this is something I shared earlier. The Organization of Foreign Propaganda work in 1918. This is the positions of power. People Commissar for Foreign Affairs was Trotsky. The Press Bureau was controlled by Radak. The Bureau of International Revolutionary Propaganda was Reinstein, and field operatives were John Reed, Louis Bryan, Albert Rice Williams, Robert Minor, Philip Price, and Jacques Soudal. In November of 1918, Minor and Price left Russia and went to Germany. Their propaganda products were first used on the Russian Murmansk front. Leaflets were dropped by Bolshevik airplanes among British, French, and American troops, according to William Thompson's program. Decision to send Sadal, Price, and Miner to Germany was made by the Central Executive Committee of the Communist Party. In Germany, their activities came to the notice of British, French, and American intelligence. On February 15, 1919, Lieutenant J. Pappas of the U.S. Army was sent to Dusseldorf, then under control of the Spartacus Revolutionary Group. He posed as a deserter from the American Army and offered his services to the Spartacus. Pappas got to know Philip Price and Robert Miner and suggested that some pamphlets be printed for distribution among American troops. The Scotland Yard report relates that Price and Miner had already written several pamphlets for British and American troops. That Price had translated some of William Lefkemnet's works into English, that both were working on additional propaganda tracts. Habis reported that Miner and Price said they had worked together in Siberia, printing an English-language Bolshevik newspaper for distribution by air among American and British troops. In June 8 of 19... Now, you do realize that the United States sent troops to Murmansk, Archangel, and later on into the area of the eastern seaport, Vladivostok. They were there not to fight anything at all. They were there to protect the interests, the products that were being shipped into the Soviet Union. That was what they were for. There was some fighting, and they didn't stay there long, naturally. But what took place simply, they were protecting American goods, you see. And the British, I don't know what they were doing, but they were probably just helping out the Americans, is what I understand. On June 8, 1919, Robert Miner was arrested in Paris by the French police and handed over to the American military authorities in Koblenz. Simultaneously, Garmin Spartacus was arrested by the British military authorities in the Cologne area. Subsequently, the Spartacus were convicted on charges of conspiracy to cause mutiny and sedition among Allied forces. Price was arrested, but like Miner, speedily liberated. This hasty release was noted in the State Department. So this is interesting what's taking place. This is what occurs. This occurs always, folks, many times, because there's one group that's basically doing certain things, and then another group's acting like they're protecting something, but then they're overridden, so to speak. Robert Miner has now been released for reasons that are not quite clear, since the evidence against him appears to have been ample to secure conviction. The release will have an unfortunate effect. Miner is believed to have been intimately connected with the IWW in America, International Workers something. I can't something to do with that. Anyway, the mechanism by which Robert Miner secured his release is recorded in the State Department files. The first relevant document stating June 12, 1919 is from the U.S. Paris Embassy to the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C., and marked urgent and confidential. The French foreign officer informed the embassy that on June 8, Robert Miner, an American correspondent, had been arrested in Paris and turned over to the general headquarters of the 3rd American Army, Koblenz. Papers found on Miner appear to confirm the reports furnished on his activities. It would therefore seem to be established that Miner had entered into relations in Paris with the avowed partisans of Bolshevikism. The embassy regarded Miner as a particularly dangerous man. Inquiries were being made of the American military authorities. The embassy believed that this to be the matter within the jurisdiction of the military alone, so that it contemplated no action, although instructions would be welcome. So you have people who are working in the government who are actually already communist sympathizers or Bolshevik sympathizers here, and they're not following the law. On June 14th, Judge R.B. Miner in San Antonio, Texas, telegraphed Frank L. Polk at the State Department. Press reports detention of my son Robert Miner in Paris for unknown reason. Please do all possible to protect him, refers to senators from Texas. R.P. Miner, District Judge, San Antonio, Texas. Polk telegraphed Judge Miner that neither the State Department nor the War Department had information on the detention of Robert Miner, and that the case was now before the military authorities at Koblenz. Later, on June 13th, the State Department received a strictly confidential urgent message from Paris reporting a statement made by the Office of Military Intelligence in Koblenz in regard to the detention of Robert Minor. Minor was arrested in Paris by French authorities upon request of the British military intelligence and immediately turned over to the American headquarters at Koblenz. He was charged with writing and disseminating Bolshevik revolutionary literature, which had been printed in Dusseldorf among British and American troops in the areas they occupied. The military authorities, now you got to understand what's going on here. The war is still going on here, folks. Okay? So he's trying to get synthesizers to the Soviet perspective. So the army is not going to be thrilled about this at all. But you have to realize the commander-in-chief, that is, Woodrow Wilson, is also a part of this. See? He's not stupid. I mean, he is stupid, but yet, meaning simply is he's following Colonel House's way of doing things. He really doesn't have enough idea. He's just caught up in his own ego, if I would say anything. The military authorities intend to examine the charges against Minor and is substantially to try him by court-martial. If the charges were not substantially, it was their intention to turn Minor over to the British authorities, who originally requested that the French hand him over to them. Judge Minor, that is in Texas, independently contacted Morris Shepherd, the U.S. Senator from Texas, and Shepherd contacted Colonel House in Paris. Wow, this really moves around, doesn't it? On June 17, 1919, Colonel House sent the following to Senator Shepherd. Colonel House is he's a major player, folks. Just, and I need to do a book on him. There is a book about him. Both the American ambassador and I are following Robert Minor's case, and I'm informed that he is detained by the American military authorities at Cologne on serious charges, the exact nature of which is difficult to discover. Nevertheless, we will take every possible step to ensure just consideration for him. Both Senator Shepherd and Congressman Carlos B. of the 14th District of Texas made their interest known to the State Department. On June 27, 1919, Congressman B. requested facilitate so that Judge Minor could send his son $350 in a message. On July 3rd, Senator Shepherd wrote Frank Polk, stating that he was very much interested in the Robert Minor case and wondering whether the state could assert his status and whether Minor was properly under the jurisdiction of the military authorities. Then on July 8th, the Paris embassy cabled Washington, confidentially, Minor released by American authorities returning to the United States on the first available boat. The sudden release intrigued the State Department, and on August 3rd, Secretary of State Lansing cabled Paris, secret, referring to previous and very anxious to obtain reasons for Minor's release by military authorities. Someone's done something here. Wonder who that is. Originally, U.S. Army authorities had wanted the British to try Robert Minor as they feared politics might intervene in the United States to prevent a conviction if the prisoner was tried by American court-martial. However, the British government argued that Minor was a U.S. citizen, that the evidence showed he prepared propaganda against American troops in the first instance, and that consequently, so the British Chief of Staff suggested Minor should be tried before American court. The British Chief of Staff did consider it of the greatest importance to obtain a conviction if possible. So they see this guy's got a problem. Documents in the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Third Army relate to the internal details of Minor's release. A telegram of June 23, 1919, from Major General Harburg, Chief of Staff of the Third Army, later Chairman of the Board of the International General Lecture, whose executive center, coincidentally, was also at 120 Broadway. Wow. Wow, the dots are connecting here, folks. To the Commanding General, Third Army, stated the Commander-in-Chief, John J. Pershing, directs that you suspend action in the case against Minor pending further orders. There is also a memorandum signed by Brigadier General W.A. Bethel in the Office of the Judge Advocates, dated June 28, 1919, marked secret and confidential and entitled Robert Minor. Awaiting trial by military commission at headquarters, Third Army. The memo reveals the legal case against Minor. Among the points made by Bethel is that the British were obviously reluctant to handle the Minor case because they feared American opinion in the event of trial by them or American for a war offense in Europe. Even though the offense with which Minor is charged is as serious as a man can commit. Serious as a man can commit. This is a significant statement. Minor, Price, and Sadal were implementing a program designed by Federal Reserve Bank Director Thompson, a fact confirmed by Thompson's own memorandum. Was not therefore Thompson and Robbins to some degree subject to the same charges? Of course they would be, but they're not in the army. But there are citizens of the United States, and they're helping a foreign power. After interviewing Sedgwick, the witness against Minor, and reviewing the evidence, Bethel commented, I thoroughly believe Minor to be guilty, but if I was sitting in court, I would not put guilty on the evidence now available. The testimony of one man only, and that man acting the character of a detective and informer. Bethel goes on to state that it would be known within a week or 10 days whether substantial collaboration of Siegfried's testimony was available. If available, I think Minor should be tried. But if collaboration cannot be had, I think it would be better to dismiss the case. This statement by Bethel was relayed in a different form by General Harbord in a telegram of July 5th to General Mainland Craig, that is the Chief of Staff of the Third Army in Koblenz. With reference to the case against Minor, unless other witnesses than Siegfried have been located by this time, CNC directs the case to be dropped and Minor liberated. Please acknowledge and state action. The reply from Craig to General Harbord, July 5th, records that Minor was liberated in Paris, and as this is in accordance with his own wishes and suits our purposes. Craig also adds that other witnesses had been attained. The exchange of telegrams suggests a degree of haste in dropping the charges against Robert Minor. Why? He says he has witnesses here. What's going on here? You see? And haste suggests pressure. There was no significant attempt made to develop evidence. Intervention by Colonel House and General Pershing as the highest level in Paris, and the cablegram from Colonel House to Senator Morris Shepherd give weight to American newspaper reports that both House and President Wilson were responsible for Minor's hastily release without trial. Holy shit. Minor returned to the United States and, like Thompson and Robbins before him, toured the U.S. promoting the wonders of Bolshevik Russia. By way of summary, we find that the Federal Reserve Board Director William Thompson was active in promoting Bolshevik interests in several ways: production of a pamphlet in Russian, financing Bolshevik operation speeches, organizing with Robbins a Bolshevik revolutionary mission to Germany and perhaps France, and with Morgan's partner Lamont influencing Lord George and the British War Cabinet to effect a change in British policy. It's almost as though these people are just rolling over dead. The people in positions of power are just rolling over. They're not doing anything. Father Raymond Robbins was cited by the French government for organizing Russian Bolsheviks for the German Revolution. We know that Robbins was undisguisable, working for the Soviet interests in Russia and the United States. Finally, we find that Robert Minor was the revolutionary propagandist used in Thompson's program, was released under circumstances suggesting intervention from the highest levels of the U.S. government. Of course, they were not allowed to do their job. Obviously, this is but a fraction of a much wider picture. These are hardly accidental or random events. They constitute a coherent, continual pattern over several years. It suggests powerful influence at the summit levels of several governments. So that is the chapter 6 here. I'm reading. Very interesting what is going on. Again, House and Wilson are involved in this whole apparatus of actually getting Minor set free. In reality, he was a communist sympathizer. And our country was not a communist government at that time. It's like basically coming along and saying, don't do that again. It's basically what allowed him a free way out of jail. So it wasn't ever on his record, you see, also. Okay, we'll stop at this point. We'll be dealing with chapter 7 next when the Bolsheviks return to New York. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope that you're enjoying this reading tonight, Chapter 6 in Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton. Have a good night. You take care.